Welcome back, travelers, to Legendary Lore!
Still not the same effect.
It's not. It really isn't, because it's not directly in his ear. So, today, we have a very special episode because I will be suing Wizards of the Coast.
Really?
Yes.
What'd they do?
So, it turns out that a while back they had the Dominaria set that came out. Mm-hmm. I want to say original Dominaria, but it's basically just the one that was labeled Dominaria. And they had the character of Squee. And Squee shows up and he's really cool and everybody loves him, and there's no story for him.
So you made one. I remember that video.
Yes, I made up my own version of what must have happened to Squee.
We have a fanfic on the channel. You guys should check it out.
It's actually like our fourth most popular video.
Oh, you guys have checked it out.
It is sadly our fourth most popular video.
If you're here, you've probably checked it out. So why are we talking about this one, though?
So basically in my story, first of all, we are the Boss Watch. Our logo is, if you look back at our like really old stuff, our mascot was a red-cloaked individual known as the Traveler who would carry around a scythe. Reason that's important is about to show up. In my story with Squee, he essentially goes to Shiv and he discovers basically that he can be he becomes the Goblin King. That's the short of what basically happens.
Okay, but there's no way they'd actually make Squee a Goblin King.
Well, you see, the whole idea is that a Goblin King is only Goblin King for as long as he's not dead. Mm-hmm. And so Squee can't die. So the moment he accidentally becomes the Goblin King, he is eternally the Goblin King. Which is how our story begins. Now, there are certain things that are slightly different. Like the fact that, you know, my story was completely different and it actually had nothing to do with Squee. But it did, but the ending is completely different. My idea is, it basically was a much larger scale thing for Squee to do. It gives him a lot more credit. This one, he is in Altaria as opposed to Shiv, because I sent him in Shiv. Altaria is a completely different mountain range on another continent entirely, and he doesn't have as vast of a school setup. So, yeah, obviously, they didn't take my story. It's more just the fact that a Goblin King is pretty much the main thing that you would expect Squee to become. Because the whole point is the whole death-based events. Now, that all said, our story picks up with them essentially talking about how Squee is immortal. And it's all thanks to that whole deal with Urte.
Yes.
But that obviously when that was all happening, Urte kept torturing Squee, Squee kept coming back to life, and then Squee manages to overload the regeneration machine that Urte uses, and it exploded and killed Urte. Basically atomized him.
And he kept the regeneration.
Yeah, well, Yawgmoth cursed him with it.
Yeah.
As far as we know. So, our story continues, and we basically
Squee's around in Yawgmoth times?
Yeah, during the invasion. He's a member of the Weatherlight.
Like I said when we were doing the time spiral stuff, I need a timeline on this Yawgmoth stuff. Because first he was there in the original Thran, and then we don't see him during Urza's whole thing, but also Urza's the team that takes him down. But also he's had like 5 different teams of people that he probably didn't care about, because he's just Urza. But he's the one who took out Yawgmoth. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure that's when he dies, but also Karn's a thing.
So, I mean, that'd be great. Once we actually do have everything figured out, just have a gigantic timeline and with everything like put on it.
Windgrace was there, but also Windgrace's soul is currently also has a personality right now, which I saw from one of the cards.
Yeah, I can. That makes sense.
Come up
in Time Spiral. It makes sense. It doesn't come up at all in the story.
Oh no, it's just a flashback card.
No, basically, just as a real quick aside, Windgrace, when he died closing one of the rifts, he basically said that he was going to leave a part of his essence in Urborg in case it ever needed him again. Because he hates Artifice. So he hates Artifice and the Phyrexians so much that when they showed back up, his soul came out of Urborg. And that's basically what you see there.
Oh, so the quote was from Time Spiral, is what you're telling me, the quote I saw.
Yeah, probably.
Okay.
Now, with that all said, Squee, while he is king in his red cloak and his scythe, wait a minute, he's...
They just looked at our thumbnail and just like, this is a good look for him.
Yeah, so here's what's great. You have Squee, this king, this leader, this guy that can't die. And then you have Bulp. Bulp is a goblin that Squee took under his wing.
Go on.
That is his best friend. And so Bulp is like, okay. And what's great is that Squee, the way he talks, he now talks normally because he's been alive so long that he actually has an eloquent level of speech that goblins never actually have a chance to get. So as far as his thing is like, Bulp, we talked about this. Like he actually just like he is able to speak in normal sentences. And then it says, so we have him talking to Bulp, basically about how they need to. They have a thing. They're going to have a feast if everybody can get around dying. Because obviously goblins, they just love, not that they love to die, but they love to do dangerous things that get them killed.
They love to die.
They don't love to die. They came here yes to die. And so basically, they are very, very, very accident prone. They run into all sorts of different kinds of things that can get them killed. So what we basically see is that after a week goes by, if no one dies, they're going to have a giant feast. Bulp is there to explain it's the 7th day, and he's like, I have terrible news. And he's like, what? So, you know how there's this one guy who really liked hanging boulders from ceilings? He's like, yeah. He's like, yeah. And so they go to the boulder, and they push it off.
The boulder.
And they realize that he's not dead. The guy under the boulder is not dead. Do you know why, Joe?
Why?
Because when Squee looks at him, its face explodes, and there's like these tendrils. And it's just...
Squee's fighting Phyrexians.
Yeah.
I didn't think that's where... I knew we were on Dominaria with Phyrexians, but for some reason when Squee came into play, it just was lost on me. I didn't realize Squee was going to be fighting Phyrexians.
You thought it was going to be just a fun romp.
Yeah, I did. Which is reasonable.
Yeah, because it's Squee.
Yeah.
And so basically Squee sees this and he freaks out and he takes it into his, like, a little, like, into his, like, chambers, his chambers with Bulp. And he's talking to Bulp, telling him, like, look, okay, things are bad. These are Phyrexians. These are the guys I told you about. He goes, oh, these are the guys you killed. That you single-handedly destroyed during the invasion. And Squee's like, yeah.
Is that really what I told you?
Yeah.
Yes. Then yeah.
He's like, well, I was kind of hoping I wouldn't have to deal with these guys again. This is kind of like...
Oh, I'm a little rusty.
Yeah. It's like, my age is catching up to me. You're immortal. My age is catching up to me.
Oh, and then just like the Jared story, a couple Squees from different timelines come in, and one of them cracks his back. You know where I'm going with this. It's the Spider-Man thing again.
So, basically, Squee goes, Bulp, I need you to run as fast as you can to the nearest town and tell all the humans there that there are Phyrexians, that there's proof of Phyrexians, and that we need to work together to stop the Phyrexians. You understand me, Bulp?
I'm already seeing where this is going bad.
And Bulp... So...
Humans have to listen to a goblin.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell you what they say.
Go for it.
And so, the name of the guy that was a Phyrexian is Rarp. And basically, Rarp's entire body is mangled, which is the only reason he can't kill anyone. Because his face, like his head is the only thing that still works. And so he can't actually move or hurt anyone. So, let's see. Right here it says, Bulp nodded as Squee showed him to the back of his quarters. He pulled aside what appeared to be a shelf to reveal a ladder recessed into the wall. Early in his reign, Squee had enlisted a digging crew to help him make an escape tunnel as a discreet way to occasionally re-enter the outside world without alerting his subjects to his absence. All these years later, it was Squee's secret. Now it would be Bulp's as well. He hoped desperately that he was not sending him to his death. Squee hugged him goodbye. And Bulp returned the gesture.
Bulp's not returned the gesture.
And Bulp returned the gesture.
No.
Joe. And Bulp returned the gesture. Lifting his king ever so slightly off the ground.
Is Bulp bigger than Squee?
Yeah, Bulp is a gigantic, like almost Mog-like goblin. So
am I only characterized as Bulp because you're Squee?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
like that size doesn't fit me.
Yeah, pretty
I'm
much.
a very small lad.
He is a very small lad. He's very tiny. So basically, what was
small head and small arms.
What,
it actually fits very well.
The thing is that because the Phyrexian didn't technically die, and it also wasn't technically a goblin, Squee's like, the festival's still on. We're still gonna have our feast. His plan, however, is to have the candlelight in the feast be the only source of light, because he knows, after observing the Phyrexian goblin, that a Phyrexian's bones can actually be seen underneath the light. Remember how earlier we had that whole deal in Latnam, where he held Ulf's hand and looked at it and was like, okay.
That's why he did that.
Yes.
Okay.
He was checking to see if he could see Phyrexian workings underneath. And so that was basically Squee's idea. All he needs to do is figure out how many goblins have been compromised.
So Squee's actually not a goon. Squee's actually...
Well, Squee's been around for thousands of years.
Like, if he was still a goon, he'd be doing something wrong.
Yeah. So, basically, he talks to Spurna, who is his head engineer, and is like, okay, I know you have because, again, Squee kind of actually did cause, like, a revolution for the goblins as far as development goes, because he encouraged them to be creative. And so, Spurna is an engineer who is able to essentially create an entire network of lamps that are made of combustible fuel. And he's like, okay, look, turn all the lamps off, and then it'll just be darkness, and except for the candlelight. Everybody's gonna love it. Obviously, he doesn't want her to know that his actual plan is to be able to tell who's Phyrexian and who's not. And Spurna's like, well, if we do that, couldn't that make everything blow up when we turn it back on? And he's like, you know, you're right, but it's a risk we have to take. And Spurna's like, I thought you'd say that. And then she pushes him off the balcony. Because it turns out, obviously, she's a Phyrexian. And so Squee wakes up and he sees that the feast has already started. And he's like, oh no, I need to figure something out. And before he can, Spurna shows up right next to him, stabs him in the gut, and he falls to the ground, dies. He wakes back up and everyone's around him. Basically, it just gets worse and worse for him until he sees blood.
What movie did that remind me of?
No, which one?
Where they just keep passing out, waking up, and a new thing's happening. There was a movie like that.
I can't recall. Anyways, Squee awoke once again. His vision was blurry, being fed through newly healed eyes to a newly reformed brain. As it came into focus, he saw the entire clan standing in a perfect circle around the two of them, watching silently as Spurna stalked him like prey. Enjoying the audience, she slowly pressed her spiked arm toward his chest, pinning him to the floor. With a sickly unnatural smile, she snapped her fingers. The mana lamps went out. Only distant torchlight flickered now, and with horror, Squee saw that every set of eyes that surrounded him was ringed with a pale gold. Every goblin that he had been looking over was actually a sleeper agent. He choked on a scream. Spurna wound up to stab him again when suddenly she was knocked wildly off her feet. She spun and landed on the ground, looking angrily at her assailant. Bulp.
Yes.
And he basically is like, Bulp! He's like really happy. He's like, we gotta get out of here. And then Squee feels a horrible burning sensation because as he looks at his hand, he sees that his flesh is rotting away and the rot has spread from his fingers down to his wrists. He falls back to the ground as his arm tears free from his body as the flesh-eating necrotic spell does its vile work. And then he watches in horror as Bulp's body flickers.
No.
The glamour that had been concealing his true form fades, and standing where Bulp had once been was a tall and unnaturally pale man with pale blonde hair. His eyes wept oil, and black cable was intricately woven into the flesh of his face. Each of his arms split at the elbow, giving him 2 additional 3-fingered hands. Do you know who this is, Joe? Urte's spiked Phyrexian armor gleamed in the torchlight. Yes.
Oh my god!
Yes!
That's so cool!
Yes! I know! This is the thing. I have been telling Joe, do not look at spoilers. They never revealed it. They haven't revealed it yet. But, oh my gosh.
I hope he has a card by the time I need to put this up.
He definitely will have a card.
Okay.
But like, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
Erte, he's such a jerk.
It's actually Squee's arch enemy.
Yes. I mean, Erte, in general, real quick aside, I know this is going to make the episode a little bit longer.
Go for it. It's worth it.
But basically, Erte was a member of the original Weatherlight crew. And he was really good at being a wizard. Like, he was a fantastic wizard. The problem is that he was kind of arrogant. By kind of, I mean extremely. And no one really liked him. They were kind of just like deal with him because they knew he was good at what he did. But then, when they were on Wrath, dealing with the Phyrexians and Volrath and the Stronghold and everything happening there, they needed to escape. And there was this portal, the erratic portal, that was opened by Erte. He was able to open it. But he was expecting them to kind of just like scoop him up and take him out. But this was during the same time where Krovax had just murdered Miri. So they're in panic mode. And so they're leaving and they're like, okay, get on, Erte, get on. And then Erte can't get on because he's not close enough. And so they just go through the portal and the portal closes and they're like, wow, he gave his life to defend us. How incredibly heroic of Erte. And so that's what they think happened. When from Urte's perspective, he's like, those jerks forgot about me.
And
They
that's
just-
when he joins Phyrexian. We know
Exactly.
everything. Okay.
And so he becomes a Phyrexian. He starts working with them. He fixes the fight between Krovax, Greven Elvek, and Volrath. So, I mean...
We go over it in whose legendary lore and Commander Legends?
Belb.
Belb's.
Yes.
I thought it was Belb.
Belb is a Phyrexian as well.
We don't need to re-go over that.
Yeah.
Urte shows up in there.
Yeah, it's such a good story. Oh my gosh. And I mean, it's so fun to hate Urte. I had a deck that was essentially, it didn't itself could
He
not
has a
win.
Sultai deck right now that's going to turn into Sans Red.
Yes.
But before that, it was
Esper.
Esper with Urte as the commander.
Yeah.
And it was still the Phyrexian field because Urte, as you can see here, is Phyrexian.
He's very Phyrexian.
After being on the weather, after being betrayed by the weather
I'm expecting him to just be blue-black this time.
That's cool.
Now, with...
Oh, this is awesome.
I know!
Keep going, keep going.
So, basically what winds up happening is that, obviously, this is Urte. And he says, it's been a long time, Squee. And he says, I thought I killed you. And he says, you of all people should know that death can be a temporary state. But it's true, Squee. You got the jump on me, and for several hundred years, I went into the dark. That might have been the end of it if Sheoldred hadn't found me. Shield who? And which, again, I actually had the whole bit in my Goblin story where they called Bells and like bells and whistles because they didn't know his name. But yeah, you know, this is completely original, not stolen from me at all. You know how it goes. So I'm not bitter. So it says that basically, as he's talking, Urte reveals that he's not going to continuously kill Squee the way he normally does. He's going to complete Squee. Which is what happens here. Yes. And so I'm just going to kind of skip by a lot of this. And so Urte tossed, because also Urte has Squee's toy. Because Squee has always had his toy with him. That little red and white pattern thing.
Yeah.
So Urte has the toy. He's taken it from Squee. And so they take Squee, and then it says, well, I'll just read how Squee reacts. When Squee's eyes opened, he felt more alert than he'd been in years. Fatigue as a concept had been removed from his body and mind. He felt a newfound strength in his muscle tissue. His eyes could see everything in the room clearly, no matter how far away. He'd been placed in a fresh set of his orange king's robes and left on the table. He sat up and removed a needle from each of his arms. As he did, a machine near the table began to emit an uncomfortable sound. No sooner than Squee had registered discomfort, the sound seemed quieter. So it's like, even to the point where if he doesn't like the way something sounds, his body just dampens it so he doesn't have to deal with it.
Squeeze basically completed.
Everything was as he remembered it.
Oh, let me see that.
This is Urte.
Oh my god.
Yes, I know he got buff. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but he got buff. He got very buff. So everything was as he remembered it, but all the things that had worried him suddenly seemed small now. He saw his people moving about the mountain, some looking like goblins, others looking like a beautiful symphony of flesh and metal. Urte appeared in a teleportation circle before him, attending to the sound. And he says, how do you feel? Powerful. Perfection has that effect. Your body may feel unfamiliar to you at first. I'd recommend taking a moment to examine your new functions. So Squee stands up and he looks at his body and he's starting to notice like he's got all these machine bits all over him, and he's got like machine guns, and he's got a rocket launcher, and he's just like a full on killing machine. And he's kind of just like, he looks and like his arm will just like open up and it comes out, and like he can just do that at will because he's fully Phyrexianized. And he says, it's like as he's looking at everything, he says, actually, Squee, even in our perfect forms, we still elect to wear our clothing. Reason being, as Squee's looking at everything, he wonders what else he changed, and so he removes his robes and just stands there naked. And Urte's like, you can put your clothes on. Like, just because you're perfect doesn't mean you got to show it off. And he goes, I thought perhaps you had given me armor. He goes, I had assumed we'd get you some upon our... And then now, Squee's looking at his chest, he's looking at all the different things, and he's basically just exploring his new body. And he says, look, Urte tells him, you won't be a king in New Phyrexia. In fact, I'd imagine they'll be doing some quite invasive research once I deliver you. And obviously Urte's like, about it, and Squee's like, that seems reasonable, for the glory of Phyrexia. So, yes, exactly. And exactly all of that. And Squee once again commanded his arms to open. One contained a hooked blade, the other a small cannon. He stared at it as it charged. So he's charging up the cannon like, wow, I can do that. That is cool. He looks at the blade and tries to extend it, and instead it spins like a projectile and sticks into the stone wall. And he looks at Urte and says, I feel complete. And of course, complete is spelled the Phyrexian way. The blade flings back at Squee at a high speed, and it severs through the exposed rope that is blocking its path, the very same rope that steadies the boulders the rock jockeys had resuspended above the mountain's entrance. Squee finds himself standing as goblins about to work in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cut line slips loose, the boulder drops onto Squee, his arm cannon goes off, hits one of the lamps that is connected to that entire combination of things, and he explodes the entire mountain. Urte, of course, was expecting this kind of thing from Squee, and he's able to protect himself with a bubble. He does not die this time. But Squee super died.
No.
So, Squee dies, and as usual, he comes back. When he reawakens, though, he reawakens in the afterlife area, where he normally would go. Because basically, every time Squee dies, he would reawaken in the afterlife, where it's basically just this hallway with a banquet table that he never actually gets to eat anything out of.
Okay.
Though this time, when he starts to approach it, he sees someone else at the table. He sees Captain Sisse. He's kind of freaked out, because it doesn't look quite like Captain Sisse. It has like these red markings across her body. And then he realizes that, as it talks to him, this is not Sisse, this is the entity that has been inside of Squee's toy. And Squee's toy basically reveals to him that it had always been protecting him, and it had chosen him because it realized that Squee had a pure soul. And so because of his pure heart, Squee's toy continuously brought him back as essentially like its representative, as its champion. In addition, when Yawgmoth did the whole immortality thing, it was meant to corrupt him, but it couldn't.
Because of the toy.
Yes. So basically what wound up happening was this weird feedback loop where he could die, but then he would come back, and he'd come back whole because of Yawgmoth and the Squeeze toy kind of combining together. And so basically what Squeeze toy tells him is that he has two choices. Either he can step through the door that materializes, and he can go into the afterlife with all of his friends, with Sisse, with Tongarth, everyone he's ever lost, or he can go back into a new body, continue to be immortal, and not Phyrexianized, since his Phyrexian body was corrupted. And Squee looks at her and he says, no, I don't want to do either of those things. And I'm going to read to you exactly what he says, because the way he says it, it's just chef's kiss. Let me see if I can find it so I can have the exact one. Let me see. Okay. So, the name of the force, like the thing that's with him, is called Salvation. And he says, she basically goes, he goes, so it's over, I finally got killed for real. This is when she talks about the whole deal. And she's essentially tells him, and this is great because it explains how it works. I accept the role I've played in your unexpected fate, and I'd like to offer you one final boon, a choice. At this moment, in the realm of the living, your body has just been destroyed. The spell that reanimates you is reaching out for your soul as it always has. It will fizzle if it does not find you soon. So basically a reanimation spell will fizzle, the way we describe it in an actual card game. This is the first time it's really being used in an official sense.
That's cool.
Is a spell fizzling without a target. And so Squee basically says about doing the third door, right? Then we come to Bulp. The actual Bulp. And it says Bulp had done everything right. He used the King's Secret Passageway. He made sure nobody saw him leave. He traveled quickly and quietly. He found the first human town. And he told them about the Phyrexians. And they all kind of looked at him and were like, no duh. There have been Phyrexians here for weeks. And we've been trying to fight them. Where have you been, you dumb goblin?
So Bulp is Internet Explorer.
Yeah. And so Bulb comes back to the mountain because he sees that it got leveled, and he's thinking, well, there's got to be some, like, you can't kill the king. King's got to be here somewhere. And so basically, before he can start digging, he hears someone behind him go, Bulb, you're alive! And so Squee is there. King Squee. And so now we see what he says to Salvation. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but before I became immortal, I never died once. Then ever since it happened, I can't seem to stop. I was once one of the smartest goblins in the whole world before I got changed. And when I went on a big adventure and helped save everybody, no matter what anybody says, I was important. But the only part of me that anybody cares about now is the thing I got by accident. Well, I'm nobody's accident. I'm my own accident. And so he actually gets to eat some of the food on the table. And he goes, I want to go back, Sally, but I only want one more. I want a chance to last as long as I can, a chance to blow something up, think I'm dead for a minute, realize I'm not, and then cry laughing. So Squee loses his immortality.
But gets his body back.
He gets his soul back, his new body, and it's just him and Bulp against all those Phyrexians. And that's how Squee's story ends.
That was so good!
Yes.
Oh my gosh!
When I read this and Urte shows up, and I'm like, hold up. What are you talking about? This is the best. Except I wasn't. Do you know why?
Why?
Because for some reason they decided to spoil Urte in a different story that came before it. I just moved this one.
You did good.
Yeah, because it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For Urte to be revealed alongside the guy who killed him. Now, it is worth noting Urte does have history with the other members of the Weatherlight crew, specifically Karn.
Okay.
Because Karn was a member of the Weatherlight at the same time. So,
that should be a good time then.
That's its own problem.
Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Go ahead and leave a like if you like the video and subscribe for...
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
It's good.